I want to start with something I came across doing my research, which I thought was quite funny. The German opposite of the word umfahren, means running something over, is umfahren, which means drive around something. So it's really about time we consider a different approach, at least in Germany, about mobility. This just doesn't come together. Thank you very much for these very, very inspiring and very fast lectures. I think the future of mobility is not only the planning of a sort of one-dimensional planning, but we have time as a fourth dimension, which then can sort of represent the complexity as well. How are people moving around during the day, winter, summer, to measure all these and also to make the data visible, we need different tools. And I think that was quite clear today with your lectures that these tools help visualizing the complexity of mobility. Now I have to find my way with the virtual reality you showed is a communication tool, but also a research tool. And I think you did the same. But the thing is, you still need the analog communication with the people on the ground, because nobody will know which apps to use if you don't make it, if you don't communicate it, where to find them and how to use them. So it's a bit what we talked earlier, that we need to reach out for the citizens, to educate them, to give them the tools, but we still have analog ways of doing this, even if we end up with virtual reality. How do you approach people? I mean, Barcelona, in Singapore, you all have, microphones. It should work.
Yeah, I mean, that became very apparent, particularly in the activation of the Superblock project in general. I mean, as I was saying before, I think people expected someone to come and knock on their door to say, hey, is it okay if tomorrow, you know, we close off the road? And I mean, I think there needs to be some sort of connection. You can't just expect people to find their way around the internet. Although I think that now the younger generations are doing it a lot more. I mean, maybe I think there's like the transfer of information is happening in a much more sort of efficient manner at the moment. So if you do create tools that do actually facilitate this dialogue, I think that once you show the tools, then maybe someone uses the tool and then says, hey, to the friend, and starts, you know, like sharing information. So there is always the human scale that's very important. I don't know.
But I think, I mean, I don't know whether you know the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they want to tear his building down and said, well, it was up for, you know, centuries that we want to build that bypass in the universe. You could have just read it. So talking about the young generation, I'm sure they're probably easy adaptable, you know. But what about old people who are not in that digital, say that not native, digital natives? How do you take their fears as well? And how do you, I mean, would they actually wear these virtual reality?
Maybe I could add some anecdotes from Singapore on elderly people in virtual reality. Some of them are very open to it, others are just afraid of it. One problem that older people have with virtual reality, it starts around 30, so not that old actually, is getting motion sick.
Oh, yeah.
As soon as your visual impression and is not in line with what your body feels, you get that mismatch in your head and you just get sick. And older people tend to get sooner sick with less sort of exposure to that. Coming back to your question, I think it's a communication problem. So we need to even go more interdisciplinary and get PR people in the room. We need communicators. Obviously, we all have some ideas of it, but those people know, for example, how to reach like audiences for political parties and so on. This is today, it's both, they are in the city centers, like at the Agora, in front of supermarkets, wherever, with stands, but they're also very active in the digital realm. And I think as planners, you need to also think in that way. And one of the, I think, opportunities that I did not emphasize enough, I think, in my presentation of virtual reality is that by one click, it's in the internet, and if people can find you there, they can see the design that you imagine, or like the different design scenarios, wherever they are, even if they are not at home on that day where you would have like that public hearing, they still can contribute. And I think there is very interesting developments, especially in Germany, with Zebralog and Next Hamburg on digital participation that need to become stronger and stronger and become more the norm rather than the special thing to do.
Then we talk about data.
Can I maybe add
Of
one
course.
thing? Because I truly believe that the public participation is super crucial, clearly. But we also notice that not even, I mean, the public is one thing, but also the exchange between the city and the industry. You would think they all know what they're talking about, or you know that they would understand the same thing by one terminology. And I think there's also a great dialogue that needs to happen to even come to these integrated solutions. And we've noticed that there's a lot of misunderstanding almost, or literacy in regards to mobility that's still lacking. And that obviously has to do with the fact that everyone is in their own competence, and it's very hard to go beyond your own field of expertise and to understand what the kind of constraints of the other person is. So I think this interdisciplinary approach that is still very, that needs to happen also more.
Well, you are the missing link, aren't you? I mean, Urban Standards is actually providing that sort of bringing people together.
Well, this is definitely one of the things that we do a lot. But you can also tell that things are already changing. Like, for example, there are some cities in Germany that already, because often they are also hierarchically structured, or they're structured in various departments, and you don't have a Querschnittsfunktion, whatever that means, too late. So there are now positions being created for within the cities where someone is
cross-sectional.
they're cross-sectional functions, and I think it's the same in the industry, is often the same thing. So this is very important. I think that needs to happen more as well.
We probably need to talk about data security. Who will share data? I mean, if we take all this data from the citizens, but also from the industry, and we make it open source, who's controlling the data? Who's using it? Who's sharing it? Are there different experiences here on the podium? I mean, this is within university, probably. It's fairly safe, I would guess.
Data is a big problem, a big issue, big opportunity as well. I think Germany is completely different to Singapore, and maybe completely also then different to the United States. In the United States, we see a monopolization of data. Now Google and Amazon want to build their own cities to sit on the data and sort of monopolize the data, which I think is a bit of frightening development, but that may be just my position coming from Switzerland or like a European context. In Singapore, it's not yet China, but still Singapore has a very strong government. It's like a one-party system, and they control the data heavily. They give out the data to researchers if you have established trust. That takes time. And then you can do very interesting things. For example, in Singapore, we got access to the smart card data, where every trip by public transport is tracked by entering and leaving sort of timestamps and locations. So we have essentially what we saw in MATSIM, what we just simulate, we have, at least for public transport, just at our hands, and we can the simulation improves much because we have the real data at hand. In future, with autonomous mobility and the 5G networks, essentially we can track everybody at a high resolution, both spatially and with regards to time. China goes very strongly in controlling their citizens. Singapore is different. Singapore has the data but doesn't use it to control citizens. In China that might be different. So it's quite a range, a bandwidth. I think what's important is that the society can decide on what they want, which is a democratic process, and I think be a bit more restrictive than what you would think can be a good strategy, because it's Big Brother. We know in which direction it can go. As long as it's like for the good, it seems all nice, but just think about that your government wants to flip things around and wants to do something with you. And then like this data that we generate and monopolize can be quite dangerous as well.
Yeah, I think there's also a lack of understanding in the potentials of data. So often what we see is that citizens who don't have an understanding of data are scared of it to some extent. Our experience is that we got quite frustrated. We needed environmental data on the city of Barcelona. And so from that, a project came out of it called the Smart Citizen Kit, which is basically an open sensor kit, which is linked to a web platform. So we are collecting open data together with citizens who are working with us, who take a kit, take it to their home and contribute to the collection of data. But again, not everyone is apt or is excited about sort of generating data. I know that the accessibility of data, or the accessibility to data, is fundamental in our opinion, is fundamental in planning and designing today, because of the fact that our urban landscapes are changing very, very rapidly at much faster pace today than they were before. And so it's very important to have up-to-date data to be able to design or actuate interventions that aren't speculative, aren't based on speculation, but rather are based on trends and how we actually use the area. So for me, data is very important. Of course, if it's in the wrong hands, it's always a little bit scary, but nonetheless, I guess
the simulation you showed is a prediction, right? First. And then you can feed in data when you get it, but you can't have 20 million people, the simulation of transport of 20 million people in real time. So it's a simulation.
It's faster than real time, because what we need to do is a Groundhog Day. So when we simulate once, then people interact, and some people want to use at the same time the same street. There is congestion, so according to the congestion the other day, in the Groundhog Day, so it's the same day repeated and repeated, some of those might change mode, might change route. So we are much faster than real time. So one simulation of one day for a whole city takes about 10 minutes or so. But we need plenty of simulations to get to a stable state, which is realistic.
What I've found interesting with these simulations is that you can, as far as I know, I don't know about this one, but I heard about other ones, where you can just simulate, for example, fuel gets more expensive. How do people react to that? Do they then leave the car at home, take the bus instead, or if it's a rainy day, they not take the bicycle, but rather the bus or a cab? So I think this, being able to manipulate in virtual reality the circumstances of mobility, that is something which could also be useful for governments to know which points can we trigger to change mobility patterns.
To also introduce new modes of mobility into the system and say, okay, what would happen if you had a on-demand shared fleet in this scenario? So.
But how predictable are people? I mean, you told us before that with the autonomous driving, you can actually step in as an activist saying, I stopped this car, I stopped this car, I stopped it. So there might be some interventions which you can't predict, or you might think about it, but how is reality?
I think we need to separate between planning models and sort of operation simulations. Now, MATSIM so far has been designed as a planning model so that we come up with a synthetic population and we make up trips and activities of those people, which in a general sense are very similar to what we observe on a daily basis. However, the differences are still the magnitude of like 10–20% in terms of volumes. Even if we can calibrate have any data to calibrate, it just doesn't work much better than this. However, if we replace the trips that we have made up with just trips that we observe from mobile phone data or from public transport smart cards, we are like 1% off. And with this type of, which I call more the operation simulation, there we can obviously more realistically simulate breakdown events, or that this MOT line drops, or you have a new construction site somewhere, and do more like of the day-to-day planning with the tool. But obviously, in the end, especially if you go more to the planning horizon, the weakness is not so much the simulation with like the car following models and turn and find the right route, but the bias is really in predicting the behavior. And there I think lays also the biggest potential in terms of research. At the moment we are working with sort of 10–20 different type of homogeneous user groups, as we call it. So one homogeneous user group would be a person in a certain age range owning a car, another person would be another age range owning a public transport, like Bahncard 100, so like free public transport travel because it's a subscription. So at the moment we are this granularity, but we know obviously there is more layers of behavior. Some people are just very much cyclist type of persons, others prefer to walk, and this granularity, we do not actually know how much granularity we need to really improve our simulation, so this is still research.
What I also wanted to know from you, Matilda, is so we saw these tools, we saw the simulations, we saw the apps. That is something you are teaching in Barcelona, and I think that is totally lacking in our universities here, as far as I know. I might be mistaken, that we have the digital tools for urban planning and mobility, thinking both topics together. How important is it to have these master units, and where do they go from there? If they have their master, where do they work? Are they going to be urban planners, or are they going straight into industry, or where do they end up with the master?
Okay, so I think education is hugely important, and I think we touched on this topic this morning in both panels, if I correctly understood. The Master in City and Technology, we actually started it 4 years ago because we saw that there was this profile lacking, a kind of halfway point between someone who understands technology and fully grasps its potentials and capacities, but also someone who understands the dynamics of planning urban space. So we sort of wanted to create sort of this mixed profile person, which is what we've always been doing. You know, we've been working in between disciplines. Now, where these people can potentially go and work afterwards, I mean, some of them continue working at IAC, thankfully, so that we can continue the research. Otherwise, we'd be a little bit stuck. But a lot of the students go and work in other academic institutions, but also industries that keep evolving their technology. You know, I think it's very important, and what I think we do quite well at IAC, and I'm not a technology expert, but we try to stay the most possibly up to date with the latest technologies to be able to teach our students. So we're constantly ourselves learning with the students, and I think that people need to understand maybe that we haven't learned enough. You know, we need to keep learning every day. We need to keep learning from our experiences. We need to keep testing, and we need to be open to having new inputs. So for me, education and awareness are fundamental, and I think they're fundamental from a very early age. So if it's happening at a master level, then to some extent it's already too late. No?
But isn't this sort of taking us apart in a way, because there's more and more research and deeper understanding of the technology, the digitalization, etc. But on the other hand, the actual planners, city planners, mobility planners on the ground are lost in complexity. I mean, they just don't know how to deal with the situation anymore. So how could we bring the knowledge back into, in a mixture?
Yeah, I think an architect never works by themselves. So the basis for any of this to work, anything of this sort to work, is that we work in collaboration together. And in that sense, even in our educational programs, we work in collaboration with people with different profiles, different expertise, who can allow us to take our projects further. I mean,
like the Superblock.
Yeah.
But then you were mad at them because it wasn't communicated well.
No, I wasn't mad. I just thought it was. No, I felt that it was an interesting situation. I mean, I think I guess I'm a little bit critical to what you were saying before. I think people are inherently lazy. So I'm not sure that if you put it online, people are going to find it and going to actually, like one of the biggest issues we had with the Super Barrio project was it was all fantastic. People played with it, but they played with it once. So how do you get them to keep playing with it? Because you need to keep updating the information. You need to keep feeding it. And that's where a kind of issue happens, like how do you continuously engage the people? And in that sense, I think making them empowered is a way to engage them, because they feel like they take an active role. So they're, they're not merely just interacting, but they're becoming active.
Like the games, I would say, the games you proposing, which is the fun part of it. So maybe that's the way of just, drawing them, taking their attention. But I think, how can you keep it real? And do you agree that with the virtual reality bike to the future, that had a real impact on the area, or was it just a nice interaction, urban intervention?
Obviously not, because I'm not a city planner. I'm not part of the government of Singapore, so I can't take the story and continue with it and bring it further to actual plans. But it still helped. We were on like national television, which is like local television in Singapore as well. It helped to actually be on the ground, and I completely agree. I think you can't just put things online and hope that someone will share it on Facebook or Twitter, and then like some, what do you call it, like virus will start. It won't go viral on its own right. So this is anything that goes viral, or many things that go viral are actually plotted and thought of communication experts. So you really need to have an online-offline strategy, I think. Offline also with like town hall meetings, the whole old concept. But then you can maybe blend it, have a town hall meeting where people can actually ask a question with apps, because some people are afraid to speak up. But then you can just add your question, and other people can in real time vote on the question that they think most important, and not just the question of those persons who have the loudest voice will get up. So I think there's many opportunities with digital innovation to actually bring public participation to a better level.
I would like to give you, as the audience, the opportunity to ask some questions. We have a microphone still, or are you all too tired? It's been a long day. There's one question over in the very rear and one here over here.
My name is Andrea. I was actually the interpreter for Mathilde before, and I just stayed out of sheer curiosity and interest because I find it very fascinating. So I'm just an interpreter and not from the field. But I have a little, maybe a somewhat provocative question on credibility and also on reaching the public. We sometimes, I think, tend to be blind on certain eyes when we come from certain areas, and I wanted to ask an ethical question, whether we really think that the involvement of Germany's automobile industry in many of the initiatives on the research and design of the future of mobility that we have heard about today. And I'm not talking about this very nice hosting of us in this building. I'm talking about, you know, the big automotive companies who are sponsoring many of those initiatives that we heard from today. Whether we really believe that this will lead to cleaner air or better protection from health hazards, or bottom line, more humane mobility, then any better than the involvement, for example, of the National Rifle Administration in the American policy of today will lead to a protection of students in the United States.
Who wants to answer?
I'm Swiss, I don't support any, or I'm not part of...
You're neutral.
I'm a neutral, and we don't have an auto industry anymore, just like some small garage shops. Like from an outside view, if I was in an industry where people say maybe in 20 years' time we need 4% of what you're selling at the moment, I would want to be at the forefront of this development, of course, because at the moment I need to take decisions about plants that produce thousands of cars a day, costs millions or billions of euros, and I need to know what to do next. And so I clearly, not exactly because I want to shape this development, but I want to understand it, so I need to be at the forefront, and therefore I think we see Audi and BMW and Mercedes-Benz and other OEMs trying to obviously reach out to planners, to mobility thinkers, to futurists. It's just part of their business, and I think we can't deny that they need to do that in a certain way. I think what's very good is that the citizens ask those questions and ask, like, you just want to shape the future according to your needs. Maybe I'm a bit like too optimistic there, and I just say, okay, those car manufacturers, they might just want to survive, and they want to understand how. And there, I think it's good that they are on board. But we still need to obviously question what they want, and really, do they want to survive or evolve, say, or do they want just to shape so that they can still continue to sell the cars? We'll see.
Well, I think the thing is also the mobility system consists of many modes, right? So the car will always be part of the mix. But I think the main question is now, how do we shift it really from own cars to shared cars, and what are these new systems? So I think that's a very crucial thing. And of course, in Germany, with such a strong car industry, it's not as neutral as, you know, Switzerland or Austria, who just think, okay, we do our stuff. So there is definitely a lot of lobby and political thing behind it, but nevertheless, I think the car as a piece in the system is not going to go away. But so I do think that the exchange and the serious discussion about these things is actually not a bad thing per se.
There was one more question in the front. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Matthias Popp. I have a question for you regarding the involvement of the car industry. You have shown very nice simulation systems you have in your big computers. Have you been able to reach out to some of the major electric car companies which have hundreds of thousands of electrical full vehicle on the road already, like Nissan, the Leaf has been sold about 400,000 times, or the i3 has been sold 100,000 times. Have you incorporated some of that data? Did you have access to the car data? You know, movement of the cars, where they're charged, where they're recharged, you know, these type of things, because that would validate your models a little bit with real data.
So personally, I have not been involved in such projects, but there is applications of MATSIM, the open source transport simulation software that we're using and co-developing for such questions. I do not know whether it was just like research that was funded by, I don't know, European Union, or whether it was collaboration projects with car manufacturers, but it's certainly development ongoing in this direction, yes. The problem with this data is always it's tight, It's tied to the contract or like the research contract that you have with those or like with those data owners, and they do not want to share that data publicly. So, and as a researcher, I always need to think about my publications as well. And if I always need to go and ask the data provider, can I publish this? And you want to publish it in a like very granular way, because there is obviously then the evidence and the knowledge, but they want to restrict as much as they can because data is their sort of new business, at least I hope so. So that's the linchpin of those collaborations. But obviously it will go in this direction.
One last question. Yep.
Hello, my name is Oliver. In the second session today in the afternoon, we heard about that statistics try to provide a better basis for political deciders to make rational decisions and less emotional decisions on traffic politics. And do you think that your tools maybe can make better emotional, rational-based decisions make possible?
I think virtual reality, yes, because it's an emotional, evidence-based tool. MATSIM, or like a transport planning tool, is more tailored towards the experts who sort of prepare decisions, and then also obviously inform journalists about, okay, we run this simulation, we run those different scenarios, and those are the outcomes. But it's still very hard to grasp and understand the mechanics behind it. It's even hard to understand the mechanics nowadays for the experts. I think maybe what we already have is open source software, which is a big step forward to like proprietary software that is currently being in use, and some like activists claim, you run this analysis with this software and that model assumptions, that can be wrong. And it's very hard to defend yourself, because it's very soon a very technical discussion that you better have over a beer, like in person rather on like a public podium. But maybe the next step would be the open model. So it's not only open software, but you have the open model, and then really like the Greenpeace activists, but also the automotive industry can actually look behind the curtains of the model, because you can fake any model to support any decision. And only if you have it open and be clear about your assumptions and about like the parameters you set into this model, and not only have the software open, but also really the model, then you can go on a podium and see, I'm all transparent, go and look at my model. But so far, I have never seen this. So whenever I go in a city and collaborate, consult on modeling, the first thing I need to do is to sign a contract that I don't give away the model, but I just use it for this project. I think that's fundamentally wrong.
I agree. In our case, the data is very subjective. To be able to make it take an objective standpoint, I think we would have to collect much more data. So we'd really have to have a huge amount of samples from different kinds of groups of people. So people who live there, users who work there, people who don't live there but live in the city of Barcelona, et cetera, et cetera. And at the moment, we don't have enough users. And this is one of the issues, you know. So we started the game. How do we get people to keep playing it?
Well, thank you very, very much. It's not umfahren, it's not umfahren, it's fortfahren. So to be continued. I think we just started to look into the future of mobility. It's been a long day. Thank you very much for coming, for staying 8 hours. And I would love to have one last picture of our speakers on the podium, if that's possible.
Dankeschön.